here right now, it probably means your mind is tired. Maybe your body is exhausted, but your thoughts keep spinning. Memories from the past, plans for tomorrow, quiet worries that grow louder when the world goes dark. You have tried to sleep, but it feels like your own mind will not let you rest. Tonight, you do not have to fight with it anymore. Tonight, you are invited to do something different. In this video, you will be guided into a long, gentle journey of Zen Buddhist wisdom, told through simple stories and calm reflections. There is nothing you have to learn, nothing you have to remember. You do not need to be good at meditation. You do not need any special experience. All you need to do is lie down, listen, and allow yourself to be carried. These teachings are ancient, but the problems they speak to are very modern. The feeling of being overwhelmed, the constant pressure to improve, to control, to know exactly what comes next. The quiet fear that you are not enough, or that you are always one step away from a life that finally feels right. Through the stories you are about to hear, you will walk beside people who have felt the same way in many different forms. A farmer who cannot stop worrying about the sky. A scholar who knows everything about wisdom but cannot rest. A seeker who spends years searching for a gate that does not exist. A master archer who forgets how to be a beginner. A gardener who fears every storm. A trader who tries to freeze a moving caravan. A weaver who cannot see how many lives are held in his cloth. A young monk who believes his true practice is somewhere far from the kitchen. A hermit who runs to the mountains only to discover that his mind has followed him. A merchant trapped under the sound of his own thoughts until the rain teaches him to listen. A man chasing the perfect boat while the one he has already carries him day after day. Two neighbors living side by side, one with wealth but no sense of enough, the other with very little but a quiet, steady heart. These are not just characters in a story. They are mirrors for the different parts of you. The anxious part, the perfectionist, the one who never feels ready, the one who wants to escape, the one who longs for rest but does not know how to allow it. As you listen, you do not have to do anything with these stories. You do not have to analyze them or force them to change you. Let them move through you the way a soft breeze moves through an open window. Some images will stay, others will fade. Even as you drift toward sleep, the deeper part of you will hear what it needs to hear. Before we begin, give yourself permission to truly arrive here. Put your phone on silent, dim the lights. Find a position that feels kind to your body. Let your pillow support your head. Let the bed hold your weight. You have carried yourself through an entire day. For the next few hours, you are allowed to put everything down. If you fall asleep in the middle of a story, that is not a mistake. That is the goal. Let the words become softer, like distant voices by a warm fire, comforting but not demanding your full attention. This is your time, your safe space, your journey. The night is ready to hold you. The stories are ready to walk beside you. And somewhere deep inside, a quieter, gentler way of being is ready to wake up even as you fall asleep. Now take a slow breath in, let it go, and let us begin our journey together. Tonight you do not need to be anywhere else. Tonight you do not need to be anywhere else. You do not need to solve anything. You do not need to hold yourself together. For a little while, the world can remain outside the walls of this moment. All that is asked of you is simple. Allow your body to rest. Allow your breath to slow. Allow your heart to loosen its grip on the day. You have been thinking for so long, planning, remembering, replaying old scenes, trying to predict what comes next. Your mind has worked hard like a lantern burning late into the night. But even a lantern is meant to be put out for a while so the darkness can hold the room in quiet. You too are allowed to rest in that darkness. Not the darkness of fear, but the darkness of deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin this journey together, notice your body. Feel the weight of your head as it rests. Feel your shoulders perhaps a little tight, perhaps a little tired. Feel your chest rising and falling. Notice how your body has carried you through this entire day without asking for much in return. Tonight is a small act of gratitude for that. As you listen, you do not have to follow every word with your mind. Let the story pass through you like a breeze through an open window. Some moments will stay, others will move on. You do not need to hold them. They will still do their work. You may find that your thoughts try to jump ahead. They may ask, "What is this about, really? What is the lesson? What am I supposed to understand?" This is normal. Your mind has been trained to search for answers, to look for clear lines, to reach quickly for control. But the teachings we will walk through tonight are older than that habit. They belong to another rhythm. They do not rush. They do not push. They do not demand that you get it in one moment of bright insight. Instead, they invite you to soften, to become curious again, to let go of the idea that you must know everything right now. In the Buddhist and Zen traditions, there is a quiet respect for not knowing, not as ignorance, not as carelessness, but as a fresh, open space in the mind and the heart. When you admit that you do not know, something inside you relaxes. You no longer have to defend an opinion. You no longer have to prove that you are right. You no longer have to hold the whole world in your hands. You can simply be here, the way the sky is simply the sky, without needing to understand every star. As you lie here, perhaps you can remember a time when you were very young before all the answers began to matter so much. A time when you looked at the world with wide eyes and did not feel ashamed of your questions. There was a freedom in that. You were allowed to be new. You were allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to learn slowly in your own time. Tonight, that freedom returns. You do not have to be the expert of your own life. You do not have to judge every feeling that passes through you. You do not need to label each thought as success or failure, right or wrong. For this one night, you are simply a traveler, and the path will carry you. There will be stories along the way. Some will sound like simple tales told by a friend beside a fire. Others may feel like mirrors, quietly reflecting parts of you that have been hiding in the dark. You may hear of a farmer who trusts the unfolding of life more than his own plans, or a scholar who knows everything about wisdom but has forgotten how to touch the present moment, or someone who spends years trying to open a gate that was never really locked. These stories are not tests. They are not puzzles you must solve. They are doors. Doors to a different way of seeing. Doors that open not with effort but with softness. As you listen, you might notice that each story gently returns you to the same place, this moment, this breath, this simple feeling of being alive right now. You may find that the edges of the day begin to blur. The worries that felt sharp a few hours ago may soften, like shapes fading in evening mist. The mind becomes less interested in repeating the same fears. It becomes more interested in resting. If thoughts arise, let them come. If they want to tell you long tales about what could go wrong, smile at them the way you would smile at a child who is tired and a little dramatic. You do not have to argue. You do not have to believe everything they say. You can simply say, "Not now. Tonight I am resting. Tonight I will let myself not know." Sometimes the deepest wisdom appears in those very spaces when we stop forcing life to make sense and allow it to simply be as it is. In the silence between words, in the pauses between breaths, in the moment when you are neither fully awake nor fully asleep, but floating somewhere in between, held by the softness of your own being. As this journey unfolds, you will hear about gates that do not exist, about questions that dissolve when you stop chasing them, about a kind of understanding that does not live in the head alone but in the whole body. You will be reminded that peace is not something you have to create. It is something you return to, again and again, gently, patiently, like coming home after a long day of wandering. For now, allow your eyes, if they are still open, to grow heavy. Let each blink be a little slower than the last. Feel the back of your head resting more fully. Let your jaw unclench, your tongue relax, your hands soften. You're safe here. You are allowed to put everything down. In a moment, we will step into the first story of this night. It begins on a quiet evening, much like this one, with someone who thought they understood how life was supposed to go and then discovered that not knowing was the doorway to a deeper peace. As you follow their journey, let it gently weave into your own, carrying you toward the edge of sleep, where thought gives way to stillness and stillness opens into rest. If this feels good to you, in the next part we will begin that first story, and you will walk beside someone who is just starting to discover the quiet power of not knowing. The first story of this night begins in a small valley where the mountains held the clouds like cupped hands. In that valley lived a man named Aaron. He was known by everyone as a very capable farmer. His fields were straight, his tools were always in order. His days were planned from the moment the sun rose until the last light faded from the hills. People came to him for advice on when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare the soil. He liked that they came. It made him feel important, solid, certain. To Aaron, certainty was everything. He believed that if he could predict the seasons, understand the soil, and calculate the right moment for every seed, then life would unfold the way he needed it to. There would be no surprises, no mistakes, no chaos. He had worked for many years to build this sense of control, and for a long time it seemed to work. His crops were good. His storage barns were full. His neighbors praised his discipline. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But inside, Aaron's mind was rarely quiet. He worried about the one storm that might come at the wrong time. He worried about insects, about disease, about the smallest change in the wind. He studied the sky each morning with a tightness in his chest, trying to read every cloud like a warning. At night, when he lay down, his body was tired, but his thoughts kept moving. What if the rain did not come? What if it came too hard? What if this year was different? He planned, adjusted, and planned again, as if his thoughts could hold back the weather. One season, after many years of good harvests, the sky decided to move in its own way, just as it always had. The rains came late. The air stayed dry and sharp. Aaron watched the soil crack in thin lines across the field. He tried to compensate. He carried water from the well in heavy buckets, walking back and forth until his legs burned. He muttered to himself as he worked, measuring every possible way to save the crop. He slept less, ate less. His mind became like a tight knot. When the rain finally came, it did not arrive gently. Dark clouds rolled over the valley, and the sky opened with a force that shook the trees. The drops fell so hard that the ground could not hold them. Water rushed through the field, tearing young plants from their roots and dragging them into the low ditches. By morning, much of Aaron's careful work lay scattered and broken. He stood at the edge of the field, mud soaking through his boots, and stared at the damage. His chest felt hollow. His mind raced, searching for an explanation, a formula, a mistake he could correct. But there was nothing to correct. The sky had not followed his plan. It had followed its own. For days he walked through the field, trying to replant what he could. But it was too late for most of the seeds. Other farmers in the valley had suffered as well, though none had worked as hard as Aaron to control every detail. Some of them shook their heads with a sad smile and said, "This year the sky was heavy." Then they went home to rest. Aaron could not understand how they were so calm. He felt as if something had been taken from him, not just his crops, but his sense of order. He started to believe that all his effort had been wasted, that life was unfair, that he had failed. One evening, as the sun slipped down behind the hills and painted the sky in soft orange, Aaron sat alone on a stone near his field. His shoulders were bent, his hands were dirty and still. An old man named Dai, who lived in a small house on the edge of the village, walked by and saw him there. Dai was known as a quiet person, not lazy, but unhurried. His fields were never the straightest, but they always seemed to give enough. He stopped and looked at Aaron for a moment. "Your field has had a hard season," Dai said in a gentle voice. Aaron let out a sharp breath. "Hard season," he repeated, a bitter edge in his tone. "I watched the sky every day. I changed the schedule. I carried water until my back screamed. And still the rain came wrong. All my planning, and for what? It was all pointless." Dai listened without interrupting. The wind moved slowly through the dry grass. "You think your work was pointless," Dai said quietly. "Then what was the work of the sky?" Aaron frowned. "The sky does not work for me," he said. "That is exactly my problem. I do everything right, and it still does as it pleases." Dai smiled slightly, not in mockery, but in understanding. He lowered himself to sit on the stone beside Aaron. For a while they said nothing. The evening light grew softer. Finally Dai spoke. "When I was young," he began, "I too believed that if I knew enough I could keep life under my hand like a tool. I studied the seasons. I watched every cloud. I counted the days of rain and sun. And still some years were kind and others were cruel. I grew angry. I thought the world was ignoring me." He paused and picked up a small clump of earth, letting it crumble between his fingers. "One year," he continued, "a drought worse than this one came. I did everything I knew. It was not enough. I lay awake at night blaming myself, blaming the sky. My teacher at that time was a very old farmer, older than I am now. He looked at me and said, 'Dai, you work as if you are the only mind in this valley.' I did not understand. I thought he was criticizing my effort. I told him, I am doing my best. Should I not try to understand everything?" The old man shook his head. "You misunderstand," he said. "You think understanding means controlling. But real understanding begins with admitting that you do not know." Aaron listened, his jaw tight. "What does that even mean?" he asked softly. "How can not knowing help me grow crops?" Dai looked at the sky, now darkening to deep blue. "When I believed I knew how the season should go," he said, "every change felt like an insult. Every cloud that came late felt like a personal attack. My heart fought the sky every day. I was as tired in my mind as I was in my body. When I finally admitted that I did not truly know what each year would bring, something unexpected happened. I stopped fighting every cloud. I still worked. I still watched the land. But I no longer believed that my plans were the law of the valley. My work and the sky's work became two different things." Aaron stared at the broken field, the torn plants, the muddy rows. "So you just gave up?" he said quietly. "No," Dai replied, his voice steady. "I gave up the belief that I was in charge of everything. There is a difference. I still rise early. I still care for the soil, but I no longer pretend that my fear can control the rain. When the season is kind, I am grateful. When it is harsh, I grieve and then I rest. My heart no longer runs in circles asking why the clouds did not obey me." The words settled into the air between them. A long silence followed. Aaron felt something loosen just a little in his chest. He realized how much of his exhaustion did not come from the work itself, but from the constant effort to hold reality in place with his mind. Every time the world moved differently than he expected, he took it as a personal failure. He had never considered that not knowing might be part of the natural order, not a flaw in his planning. "How do you live with not knowing?" Aaron asked at last. Doesn't it make you feel small? Dai smiled again, the lines around his eyes soft. It does, he said, but small in the way a single tree is small in a great forest. I still matter. My work still matters. But I no longer try to be the whole forest. I am simply one tree doing what a tree can do. The first stars began to appear above them. The air cooled. Aaron felt the tiredness in his body more clearly now that his anger had softened. He took a slow breath. For the first time in many nights, he did not try to calculate the future. He simply sat listening to the quiet sounds of the valley settling into night. Perhaps, he said slowly, this year I can let the sky be the sky, and I can be just a farmer again. Dai nodded. That is already a kind of wisdom, he replied. You do not need to understand everything to rest. You do not need to win against life to belong in it. Later that night, when Aaron finally lay down, his field was still damaged. His problems had not magically disappeared, but his mind no longer rushed like a river in flood. There was space around his thoughts, like open sky around the mountains. As your own body rests now, you might feel a little of what Aaron began to feel. The sense that you do not have to hold the whole world together with your thoughts. The sense that not knowing can be a soft place to lie down, not a failure. In the next part, we will meet another traveler on this path. Someone whose head was full of spiritual knowledge, yet who still could not sleep in peace, because their mind had learned about wisdom but had forgotten how to live it in the present moment. On the other side of the mountains, far from Aaron's valley, there was a small city built along a wide river. Lanterns hung over narrow streets, old wooden bridges curved over the water. Temples and tea houses rested side by side. In that city lived a man named Kenshi. Kenshi was not a farmer. He was a scholar. From the time he was young, he loved books more than anything. While other children ran through alleys and chased kites in the wind, Kenshi sat in corners with scrolls and worn pages, tracing every line of ink with careful eyes. As he grew older, his hunger for knowledge only deepened. He studied philosophy, poetry, and religion. He read about the great teachers of the past, the saints, the monks, the sages who had spoken of freedom and peace. When he heard about the Buddha, his heart sparked in a special way. Here, he thought, is someone who understood the suffering of the world and found a way beyond it. Kenshi wanted to understand that path completely, so he studied everything he could find. Sutras, commentaries, reflections from masters long gone. He memorized verses about impermanence, about non-self, about compassion and emptiness. He could recite long passages without looking at a page. People in the city began to respect him. They came to his small study room lined with shelves and asked him questions about existence, suffering, enlightenment. Kenshi answered with calm, precise words. He quoted teachers they had never heard of. He explained concepts that made them nod with admiration. Many left his room saying, "He is very wise." Kenshi liked that, but there was a problem Kenshi could not explain to anyone. At night, when the visitors went home and the lamps burned low, his own mind would not rest. He would lie down on his thin mattress, close his eyes, and feel thought after thought rising like birds startled into the air. Had he explained that passage correctly? Was his understanding of emptiness pure enough? What if there were writings he had not yet read, teachers he had not yet studied, subtleties he had not yet grasped? His chest felt tight, his breath shallow. The more he filled his head with knowledge, the more restless his nights became. He told himself that once he understood everything clearly, his heart would finally settle. So he studied harder. He read later. He drank bitter tea to stay awake. His eyes grew tired. There were days when he felt dizzy. Still, he kept going. One afternoon, after many years of this life, Kenshi visited a temple on the edge of the city. It was not grand. It did not have many statues or golden ornaments. But he had heard there was an old monk there who had lived a very simple life for many decades. Some people said the monk did not teach much. He mostly swept the courtyard and sat quietly under a maple tree. Kenshi thought that sounded almost like a waste. Still, his curiosity led him there. When he arrived, the temple was quiet. The air smelled of incense and wood. He saw a narrow path leading to a courtyard shaded by the wide branches of a tree. There, an old man in simple faded robes was sweeping fallen leaves into a gentle pile. His movements were slow, unhurried, not stiff, not lazy, just present. Kenshi approached and bowed politely. "Master," he said, "I have studied the teachings of the Buddha for many years. I have read countless texts. People come to me asking for guidance. They seem to find comfort in my words. And yet," he hesitated, feeling something fragile open in his chest. "And yet I cannot rest. My mind does not sleep easily. My heart is not peaceful." The old monk stopped sweeping. He leaned on the handle of his broom and looked at Kenshi with clear, steady eyes. There was no judgment in them, only attention. "You have studied a great deal," the monk said. "That is clear from the way you stand, from the way you speak. So tell me, when you eat your meal, do you taste it?" Kenshi blinked, surprised by the question. "Of course," he said, "I taste it." "Do you?" the monk asked softly. "Or do you think about what it means to taste? Do you examine whether your tasting is in line with some teaching? Do you consider how a wise person would taste, even as the food grows cold in your bowl?" Kenshi opened his mouth to answer and then closed it again. He thought of last night's meal. He remembered sitting at his small table, a bowl of rice and pickled vegetables in front of him, a scroll open at his side. The rice had been almost an afterthought. He could not clearly remember how it had tasted. "I suppose," he said slowly, "I do spend more time thinking than simply being with what I am doing." The old monk nodded. He resumed sweeping, a small smile at the corner of his lips. "And when you breathe," he continued, "do you feel the air enter your body? Do you feel your chest and belly move? Or do you think about the nature of breath, about how it comes and goes, about how it is empty of permanent self? Do you turn even your breathing into a concept?" Kenshi felt his cheeks warm. It was as if the monk had been inside his room at night, listening to his thoughts run in circles, turning even the simplest experiences into material for analysis. "I have wanted to understand deeply," Kenshi said. "Is that wrong?" The monk shook his head lightly. "No, it is not wrong, but there is more than one kind of understanding. There is the understanding that lives in the head. It collects, organizes, compares. Useful in its own way. But there is another understanding that lives in the whole body. It tastes. It feels. It sits in silence without rushing to wrap words around every moment. That understanding is like warm water around the bones. It soaks into your being. It does not need to prove itself." A leaf fell from the tree and landed between them. The monk swept it gently into the pile. Kenshi watched his hands, his shoulders, the calm way he moved with the broom. There was no hurry in him, no tension. Kenshi realized that in all his years of study he had rarely seen anyone who looked so at ease doing something so simple. "But how do I reach that kind of understanding?" Kenshi asked. "I have read that the Buddha spoke of direct seeing, of awakening. I have searched for it in texts. I have traced commentaries. I have mapped teachings against each other. Where is the doorway I keep missing?" The monk rested both hands on the broom handle and smiled more fully now, the lines on his face deepening. "Perhaps," he said, "the doorway is the one you step over every day without noticing. You look for it in complicated ideas. You expect it to open through effort, through achievement, through adding more and more to your mind. But the doorway to direct seeing is often in taking something away. Kenshi frowned slightly. Taking something away, he repeated. What do I need to remove? The monk tilted his head. Your insistence on always understanding before living, he said gently. Your habit of treating life as a problem to solve instead of a moment to experience. You live as if each breath is an exam. You forget that breathing is also a gift. The words entered Kenshi like a slow, warm wave. They did not feel sharp. They did not accuse. They simply described with a painful kind of accuracy the way he had been moving through his days. Even now, talking to this monk, he noticed his mind trying to turn the conversation into notes, into a system, into something he could later teach. He felt suddenly very tired. The monk saw the change in his eyes and softened his voice even more. Tell me, he said, when was the last time you walked through the city without thinking about anything except the feeling of your feet on the ground? The sound of the river, the warmth or coolness of the air on your skin. Kenshi searched his memory. He could recall many walks, but in each one his head had been full of thoughts. Planning his next talk, turning over a verse he had read, comparing teachings from different schools. Thinking, always thinking. I am not sure I ever have, Kenshi admitted. The monk nodded with quiet understanding. Then perhaps your restlessness is not a mystery, he replied. You have been living above your life, in the clouds of thought, like a man always looking at maps of rivers but never touching the water. The body does not find peace in maps. It finds peace in the coolness of the stream on the skin. Kenshi felt something in his throat tighten, not with arrogance, but with grief. Grief for the years spent chasing wisdom while ignoring the simple presence of his own breath, his own body, his own steps. What should I do? He asked. The monk looked at him with steady eyes. Tonight, he said, when you go home, do not open a scroll. Do not rehearse teachings in your mind. When you eat, just eat. Taste your food. When you drink water, feel it move into you. When you lie down, feel the weight of your body on the mattress and your breath entering and leaving like waves on a shore. If thoughts about understanding come, let them drift past like clouds. You have spent many years filling your mind. Give it one night to empty. Kenshi felt both resistance and relief rising within him. Part of him clung to his old habits. Another part, softer and quieter, longed for exactly what the monk described. He bowed deeply. I will try, he said. The monk smiled. Do not try too hard, he replied. Trying is another form of tension. Instead, be curious, be gentle. Let life show itself to you one moment at a time. That night, Kenshi did as he was told. He ate his meal without reading. At first, his mind protested. It reached for familiar patterns, but slowly he began to notice the texture of rice on his tongue, the warmth of the tea in his hands. When he lay down, he felt the mattress under his shoulders. The way his chest rose and fell, thoughts still came, but he did not chase them. He let them float away. His body, long ignored, seemed to sigh. And for the first time in many years, sleep came not as an enemy he had to wrestle, but as a soft friend sitting quietly beside him until his eyes grew heavy. As you rest here now, you may recognize something of Kenshi in yourself. The part that seeks safety in thinking, in planning, in collecting ideas, while the body simply longs for the gentle honesty of this moment. In the next part of our journey, we will walk with another seeker who searches for a special gate, a perfect moment of awakening, only to discover that the barrier between them and peace was never as solid as it seemed. Beyond the river city where Kenshi had spent his years buried in scrolls, there was a coastal town that woke each morning to the sound of waves touching the shore. Fishing boats moved in and out with the tides. Children ran along the sand, drawing shapes that the ocean slowly erased. In a small house above the harbor lived a man named Rio. From the outside, his life looked ordinary. He worked in a modest shop repairing nets and tools for the fishermen. He had enough to eat, a roof that did not leak, and neighbors who greeted him kindly. Yet inside, Rio carried a constant feeling that something was missing. He had heard stories of awakening, of enlightenment, of a peace so deep that no storm could disturb it. He imagined it as a shining state on the other side of his ordinary days, like a secret garden hidden behind a high wall. If only I could find the gate, he would think, then my real life could begin. One evening, as the sun slipped into the sea and painted the water in shades of gold and rose, Rio walked along the shore, his feet sinking slightly into the damp sand. His mind was filled with a familiar mix of longing and frustration. There must be more than this, he whispered to himself, more than waking, working, eating, and sleeping. The teachers speak of freedom, of deep stillness. Why can't I find it? Where's the door? What am I missing? As he walked, he saw an old man sitting on a rock near the water's edge, watching the waves roll in. The man's clothes were simple, his hair was gray, his posture was relaxed. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance, yet something in his presence made Rio slow his steps. He seemed at ease in a way Rio had rarely seen. No fidgeting, no restless scanning of the horizon. Just a quiet, steady being. Rio hesitated, then bowed slightly. "Good evening," he said. The old man looked up and smiled. "Good evening," he replied. His voice was calm, like water that had settled after a storm. Rio stood for a moment, unsure of what to say, then the words rushed out of him. "Sir, may I ask you something strange?" The old man chuckled softly. "Strange questions are often the most honest," he said. "Ask." Rio took a breath. "I have heard that there is such a thing as awakening," he said. "A way to be truly free even while living an ordinary life. I have read a little. I have listened to stories. People speak of crossing over, of passing through some kind of gate, but no matter how much I search, I cannot find it. I feel as if I stand on the wrong side of a wall I cannot see." The old man listened without interrupting. His eyes did not drift away. He did not hurry to answer. When Rio finished, the old man turned his gaze back to the sea. Waves were sliding up the shore and drawing back again in an endless rhythm. "How long have you been looking for this gate?" he asked. Rio thought for a moment. "For many years," he said. "I keep thinking that if I meditate more, if I learn more, if I change myself enough, the gate will appear." The old man nodded slowly. "And where?" he asked gently. "Do you expect to see it? In the sky, in a temple, in your mind?" Rio sighed. "I do not know," he admitted. "I only know how it feels, as if there is a barrier between me and a deeper way of living, as if I am always just outside something important." The old man was silent for a long time. The sky grew darker. The first stars appeared. The sound of the waves filled the space between them. Then he said, "Stand up straight, Rio." Rio did as he was told, a little confused. "Take one step forward," the old man said. Rio looked down at the sand. There was nothing in front of him, only more beach leading toward the water. Still he obeyed and took a single slow step. "Now," the old man continued, "tell me what has changed." Rio blinked. "Almost nothing," he said. "I am simply one step closer to the sea." The old man smiled. "Is there a wall between you and the waves?" he asked. Rio frowned. "Of course not," he said, "when the space is open." "Then why?" the old man asked, his voice soft but clear. "Do you speak as if there is a great gate between you and peace? You are standing in open space and calling it a prison." Rio felt a flicker of irritation. "But I do feel blocked," he said. "I feel separate, as if I'm always one step away from truly being present. There must be something I have not broken through yet." The old man nodded, unbothered by Rio's frustration. "Yes," he said, "there is something you have not broken through. But it is not a gate built by the world. It is a story built by your mind. You keep telling yourself that awakening is somewhere else, sometime later after you have crossed a special threshold. That story keeps you walking in circles in your own head, while the doorless sky waits above you, and the open sea waits in front of you." Rio fell silent. His chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to explain how real the feeling of distance was. But another part of him, quieter and deeper, recognized a strange truth in the old man's words. "If there is no gate," he said slowly, "then what have so many teachers spoken about? What are people crossing when they say they have awakened?" The old man gently picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. They watched the ripples spread outward in widening circles. "Imagine," he said, "that you are standing in a room with no walls and no ceiling, but you have your eyes covered with a cloth. You believe you are trapped. You believe there must be a door somewhere if only you search harder. You walk and walk, growing more desperate. Then one day your hand brushes the cloth. For the first time you realize it is there. You tug at it. Slowly it falls away. You look around and see that you were never trapped at all. The room was always open, only your belief in the cloth made it feel like a prison." He turned to Rio. "The gate people speak of is often like that. Not a real barrier in the world, but a shift in seeing. Before, you believed peace was somewhere far away, waiting on the other side of a perfect moment, a perfect version of yourself. After, you see that peace was always woven into the fabric of this moment, even when you were confused. The crossing happens in your understanding, not in your feet." Rio let these words sink in. He felt both drawn to them and resistant. A part of him did not want the answer to be so simple. If there was no grand gate to find, no dramatic crossing, then what had he been struggling toward all these years? The old man seemed to sense this struggle. "You have tried very hard," he said kindly. "You have worked on yourself the way a man might push his shoulder against a stone door that does not exist. No wonder you feel tired. Your effort is real, the door is not." Rio sank down onto the sand, his knees suddenly weak. He looked out at the waves, at the smooth movement of water meeting land again and again without needing to pass through anything. A quiet sadness rose in him, mixed with relief. Sadness for the life he had lived as if locked out of his own heart. Relief that perhaps he did not need to keep searching in such a tense, desperate way. "If there is no gate," he asked in a softer voice, "then what do I do now? How do I stop feeling separate from peace?" The old man looked at him with eyes full of patience. "You stop waiting for a different life," he said. "You stop postponing your presence until you feel worthy or ready. You let this breath be the one that counts. You listen to the sound of the waves not as someone standing outside their own existence, but as someone who is already part of this world. You drink your tea and feel the warmth. You speak and actually hear the sound of your own voice. You let yourself fully occupy this simple moment as if there is nowhere else to be, because there isn't." Rio felt the wind touch his face, cooler now as the sun slipped below the horizon. He heard the soft hiss of water on sand, the distant call of a bird, the gentle creak of a boat in the harbor. These sounds had always been there, yet he had often heard them only as the background to his inner search. For the first time, he let them arrive without filtering them through his story of not there yet. He noticed his own breathing, in, out, the steady rise and fall. The old man stood. "I will walk back now," he said. The night is coming. You may stay here as long as you like, but remember this. Every time you tell yourself there is a gate between you and this moment, you tighten the cloth over your own eyes. Every time you let yourself simply be here without the story of before and after, the cloth loosens a little. Rio bowed, his throat thick. "Thank you," he whispered. "I do not know if I can change all at once." The old man nodded. "You do not need to," he replied. "Even a small crack in the story lets in light. Trust small shifts. They are how mountains are weathered and how hearts are softened." When Rio finally left the shore that night, the town was quiet. Lamps glowed in windows. The air was cool. He walked home not as a man who had passed through a mystical gate, but as someone who had begun to suspect that the gate was his own idea. As he lay down to sleep, his bed felt no different. His room looked the same, and yet inside there was a little more space, a little less pressure to arrive somewhere else. As you rest now, you may feel something similar. The sense that perhaps the distance between you and peace is thinner than you once believed. In the next part of our journey, we will visit another scene, where the lesson is not about gates or knowledge, but about the freshness of seeing life with beginner's mind, like tasting water as if for the first time. The path of our story now turns from gates and invisible walls towards something softer, yet just as powerful. The quiet courage of beginning again. Far from the sea where Rio had met the old man on the shore, there stood a small village nestled between gentle hills. At the edge of that village was a training hall made of polished wood and open windows. Inside, for many years, a man named Haru had practiced the art of archery. When Haru was young, he had fallen in love with the bow, the way some people fall in love with music. He loved the feel of the wood in his hands, the curve of the bowstring, the stillness required before the arrow could truly fly. He watched the older archers with wide eyes and dreamed of one day being as skilled as they were. At the beginning, every lesson felt like a miracle. The first time he learned how to stand, the first time he learned how to breathe before drawing the bow, the first time an arrow actually reached the target at all. His heart had leapt in his chest, full of surprise and joy. As the years passed, Haru became more and more skilled. His arrows began to land closer and closer to the center of the target. His teacher praised his discipline. Other students looked at him with admiration. Over time, he became one of the most respected archers in the region. People invited him to demonstrate at festivals. Children pointed at him and whispered that he was a master. Haru liked the feeling. He also felt a growing pressure inside. When he picked up the bow, he no longer felt the same sense of wonder he had known as a beginner. Instead, a voice in his mind began to speak in a stiff, demanding tone. "You must not miss. You are supposed to be a master. Everyone is watching." He tried to push that voice away with more practice, more discipline. He stayed longer in the training hall, shooting arrow after arrow until his fingers ached and his shoulders burned. Some days his aim was flawless. Other days his hands shook and the arrows flew wide. On those days he felt ashamed and confused. How could someone of his experience miss the target so easily? One spring morning, Haru stood alone in the training hall. The air smelled of wood and dust. A row of targets waited at the far end. He raised his bow, drew back the string, and released. The arrow flew, but it did not land where he had intended. It struck the target off-center, wobbling as it hit the straw. The miss was not terrible, but to Haru it felt like a failure. His jaw tightened. He tried again. Another miss, this time farther. He could feel frustration rising like heat in his chest. He reminded himself of every technique he had ever learned. He adjusted his stance, his grip, his breath. But the more he tried to correct himself, the stiffer he became. His shots grew worse. It was as if all his years of training had tangled together in his mind, turning into a knot he could not untie. "What is wrong with me?" he muttered. "I know how to do this. I have done it thousands of times. Why can I not simply shoot an arrow?" He stood there, breathing hard, his shoulders tense, when he heard a small sound outside the open window. The sound of a stone skipping across water. Tap, 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 then silence. Curiosity tugged at him. He lowered his bow and walked outside. Beyond the training hall, a narrow path led to a stream that curved around the edge of the village. There he saw a young girl standing by the water's edge. She could not have been more than 10 years old. Her hair was tied back with a simple ribbon. She bent down, picked up a flat stone, and flicked it across the water. The stone bounced several times before sinking. Each movement was quick and light, almost playful. Haru watched her for a while. The girl did not seem to notice him. She tried different stones, laughed softly when one sank too soon, and smiled when another traveled surprisingly far. There was no tension in her shoulders. No voice in her head, he guessed, telling her that every throw must be perfect. She was simply there, with the water and the stones and her own joy. After a moment, Haru stepped closer. "You are very good at that," he said. The girl looked up, surprised, then smiled politely. "Sometimes," she replied. "Sometimes the stones fall right away." Haru nodded. "And when they fall," he asked, "do you feel upset?" She shrugged. "Not really," she said. "Then I just pick another one." Her answer was so simple that Haru almost laughed. He had spent the whole morning fighting with himself over a few imperfect shots, and here was a child who accepted each throw as just one more moment, nothing more. "May I ask you something?" he said. The girl tilted her head. "When you throw the stone," Haru continued, "what are you thinking about?" She looked at the water for a moment, then at the stone in her hand. "I think about this throw," she said. "I feel how the stone sits in my fingers. I look where I want it to go. Then I throw. I don't think about the throw before or the throw after, only this one." Her words entered Haru more deeply than she could have known. Only this one. He realized that when he stood in the training hall with his bow, he almost never met the shot in front of him as if it were new. Each arrow carried the weight of all the arrows he had shot before, all the expectations, all the memories of praise and fear of failure. He was not meeting the present moment. He was arguing with his past and trying to control his future. "Thank you," he said quietly. The girl smiled, unsure why he sounded so serious over something as simple as skipping stones. She turned back to the water, already absorbed again in the next throw. Haru walked slowly back to the training hall. The bow waited where he had left it. He stood in front of the target and paused. He noticed how tight his body felt. He took a slow breath and remembered the girl's words. Only this one. He let his attention rest on the feel of the bow in his hand, the texture of the wood, the slight pull of the string against his fingers, the weight of his feet on the floor, the rise and fall of his breath. For a moment he forgot about being a master. He forgot about all the eyes that had ever watched him, all the praise, all the stories about his skill. In that simple stillness, he was just a person standing with a bow about to release an arrow. Nothing more, nothing less. He drew the string back and let the arrow fly. It landed near the center of the target. A clean, simple shot, not perfect, but honest. He felt something shift inside him, not a dramatic explosion of insight, more like a door inside his chest opening a crack, letting in a little fresh air. Over the next days, Haru began to work with this new way of seeing. Each time he picked up the bow, he reminded himself, only this one. Each arrow was its own moment, its own small world. Some landed well, Some did not. When they flew wide, he noticed the tendency of his mind to shout and criticize. Then he would take a breath, feel his feet, feel the bow, and return as gently as he could to the next arrow. Slowly, he began to sense what Zen teachers call beginner's mind. A mind that meets each moment as if it were brand new, even if the body has done something 1,000 times. A mind that is curious instead of rigid, present instead of trapped in old stories. He realized that his problem had not been that he knew too little. It was that he clung too tightly to what he knew. His identity as a master had become a cage. Inside that cage there was no room to be surprised, to learn, to make a mistake without feeling crushed by it. When he allowed himself to be a beginner again, even for a breath, the cage loosened. There was space to breathe. In time, students began to notice a change in Haru. His shots became steadier not because he forced them, but because he was more relaxed. His lessons became gentler. He encouraged his students not to chase perfection, but to meet each practice as a new chance to feel alive, to feel present, to feel the bow and the target and their own breath. Skill is important, he would say. But more important is how you stand in this moment. Are you here, or only in your thoughts about here? As you rest now, you may feel your own life reflected in Haru's story. Perhaps there is some part of you that has tried very hard to be good at living, at working, at loving, at healing. Perhaps you have become stiff with expectations of yourself. Tonight you are allowed to set down the idea that you must already know how to do it all. You can let this breath be your first breath, this moment be your first moment. In the next part of our journey, we will move from the training hall to a quiet garden, where someone learns that even the most carefully controlled beauty must one day open itself to the wildness of change. From the archery hall where Haru relearned how to be a beginner, our journey drifts now into a quieter place, where beauty and control have been woven together so tightly that there is barely room left for the wind to pass through. Not far from the hills where Haru practiced, there was an old estate known for one thing above all else: its garden. People traveled from nearby villages and distant towns just to walk its paths for a few hours. They spoke of it in soft voices as if it were a temple in its own right. The man who cared for this garden was named Hideo. He was not famous in the way warriors or scholars are famous, but among those who loved gardens, his name carried a certain weight. When Hideo first came to the estate as a young apprentice, the garden was already beautiful. Over the years, under his careful hands, it became almost unreal. Every stone was placed with intention. Every tree was pruned to just the right shape. The moss grew in soft carpets, not too thick, not too thin. The paths curved in elegant lines that pleased the eye from every angle. If a leaf fell onto the white gravel, Hideo would notice. If a branch reached even slightly beyond the shape he had planned for it, he would correct it. Visitors would walk through the gate, see the garden spread out before them like a painting brought to life, and stop in awe. "It is perfect," they would whisper. Hideo took pride in these words. He rose before sunrise, walked the paths in the cool morning air, and checked everything. The garden became not only his work, but his mirror. When it looked perfect, he felt at ease. When something was out of place, he felt restless, as if his own inner order had been disturbed. One summer, the weather was kind. Gentle rains, warm days, soft breezes that did not break the branches. Hideo's garden looked more composed than ever. Sometimes he would stand on the veranda and gaze at it with a quiet satisfaction, like an artist who has finally balanced every color on the canvas. He thought to himself, if I can keep it like this, if nothing disturbs it, then I have truly succeeded. But life has a way of testing the places where we hold on too tightly. Late one afternoon, as the sky glowed with heavy light, a wind began to rise. At first it was only a stronger breeze, but soon the air thickened. Clouds gathered, dark and heavy. The leaves of the trees turned their pale sides to the sky. Hideo felt a tightness in his chest as he watched from the veranda. He could sense what was coming. A storm rolled in with sudden force. Rain crashed down in hard sheets. Branches bent and shook. Leaves tore free and spun through the air. The white gravel paths blurred as water poured over them, cutting small channels through the careful lines. Hideo stood helpless. He could not protect every branch, every flower, every stone. All he could do was watch as the garden he had shaped so carefully was touched by wildness, by movement, by forces that did not care about his design. When the storm finally passed, the light returned, thin and gray. The air smelled of wet earth and broken leaves. Hideo stepped out into the garden with a heavy heart. What he saw made his stomach sink. Fallen branches lay across the moss. Wet leaves clung to carefully raked gravel. Some stones had shifted, their precise angles softened by the flow of water. Puddles reflected a sky that looked strangely innocent now that the storm had spent its fury. Hideo felt a sharp pain in his chest. It looked wrong. It looked broken. He moved quickly, almost frantically, picking up branches, clearing the paths, trying to put things back the way they had been. But the more he worked, the more he realized how much had changed. A tree he had watched over for many years had lost one of its main branches. A cluster of flowers he had nurtured was flattened. He could not simply sweep and rake and pretend the storm had never happened. It had left its mark. As the evening deepened, Hideo sat on a stone bench in the center of the garden, surrounded by half-completed repairs. His back ached. His hands were scratched. Inside, he felt a mixture of sadness and anger. "Why," he muttered, looking up at the fading sky. "Why tear apart what took so much care to create?" He knew storms were part of life, yet tonight it felt personal, as if something had reached into his private sanctuary and rearranged it without his consent. As he sat there, lost in thought, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching the veranda. The estate's owner, an old woman with kind eyes and a back curved gently by age, stepped out and looked over the garden. Hideo rose quickly and bowed, embarrassed that she should see it in such a state. "I am sorry," he said. "The storm came hard. I have not yet finished cleaning. It must be painful to see it so ruined." The old woman tilted her head, studying the scene before them. For a long moment she said nothing. The garden lay open to their gaze, no longer perfectly composed, but full of new lines and shapes created by wind and rain. Finally she spoke. "Ruined," she repeated softly. "Is that what you see?" Hideo blinked. "Yes," he said. "Look at the paths, the moss, the broken branch on that pine. It was balanced before. Now everything is disturbed. I will fix it as soon as possible." The old woman walked slowly down the steps and onto the wet stone. She moved with care, her feet making small sounds in the damp gravel. She paused beside a place where rainwater had cut a winding channel through the carefully raked pattern and smiled faintly. "Do you remember," she asked, when you first came here, how this garden looked?" Hideo thought back. "It was beautiful," he said. "But wilder than now. The stones were not as carefully placed. The trees were not as precisely shaped." She nodded. "And what did you see in that wildness back then?" He hesitated. "I saw a possibility," he admitted. "I saw what it could become with care." The old woman pointed gently toward the place where the pine tree had lost its branch. "And now," she said, "can you see any possibility in what the storm has done?" Hideo's first instinct was to say no. All he could feel was the loss. But her question held him. He forced himself to look more closely. The broken branch had opened a gap in the canopy, allowing a shaft of light to reach a patch of moss that had been in shadow for years. The rain channels in the gravel made soft curves that echoed the flow of the stream beyond the wall. Fallen leaves rested in unexpected places, adding color to spaces that had been almost too controlled before. I only see damage, he started to say, but the words caught in his throat as something inside him softened. Part of him did see more than damage. Part of him saw change. Unwanted change, yes, but also a shift, an opening, a different kind of beauty that he did not yet know how to name. The old woman watched his face. You have done a remarkable job shaping this garden, she said gently. Your devotion is clear, but sometimes in your love of order you forget that this place is alive. It is not a painting fixed on a wall. It breathes with the weather, with the seasons, with time. You have been trying to make it safe from change. But a garden that never changes is not truly a garden. It is only an image. Her words settled on him like the light mist still hanging in the air. Hideo felt a familiar stiffness in his chest, the same stiffness that had driven him to correct every stray leaf. He realized that he had treated this living place as if it were a test he had to pass every day. As long as it looked perfect, he could feel that he was all right. When it was disturbed, he felt personally attacked. I did not want to lose what we had made, he said quietly. The old woman nodded. Of course, she replied. It is natural to want to protect what we love, but tell me, Hideo, do you think the purpose of this garden is to prove your control, or to remind those who walk here of the dance between form and change? He did not answer right away. He thought of the visitors who had come over the years, their faces softening as they walked the paths, their shoulders dropping as they listened to the wind move through the branches. Had they really come to admire his perfection? Or had they come to remember something inside themselves, something about stillness in the midst of life's constant movement? I thought perfection was the highest form of beauty, he admitted. Maybe I have been afraid to let anything unpredictable touch it. The old woman looked around once more, her eyes tracing the lines the storm had drawn. There is a saying, she murmured. The cracked cup lets the light through. Perhaps this garden needed the storm to loosen your grip. Now you can work with the wind and rain, not against them. You can shape, yes, but you can also listen. Over the next days, Hideo returned to his work with a slightly different heart. He still cared for the garden. He still cleared broken branches and guided the growth of trees. But he no longer aimed to erase every sign of the storm. In some places, he allowed the new curves of the gravel to remain, softening them but not forcing them back into their old, strict lines. He pruned the damaged pine in a way that honored its new shape, letting the light reach the moss below. Slowly, the garden became something both old and new, still peaceful, still intentional, but with a hint of wildness that made it feel more alive. Visitors noticed something they could not quite name. The garden seemed to breathe more. It felt less like a frozen picture and more like a living poem. Hideo, too, began to feel different. He no longer walked the paths only to check for flaws. Sometimes, especially in the early morning, he would stand still and let his eyes rest not on the places that needed work, but on the way the garden felt. The sound of birds, the movement of shadows, the way the air changed from season to season. He realized that his own heart was like this too. He had tried to keep it perfectly arranged, afraid of any storm that might disturb it. But perhaps, just as the garden had needed that wild rain, his inner life needed moments of breaking and rearranging to become truly real. As you rest now, you might sense the gardens in your own life, the places you have tried to keep perfectly in order, safe from change. Perhaps there is a part of you that longs to breathe more freely, even if that means letting a few leaves fall out of place. In the next part of our journey, we will leave the garden and follow a caravan across open land, where a trader discovers that what he clings to as solid and permanent is already moving and changing beneath his very gaze. From Hideo's garden, where branches broke and beauty learned to breathe again, our path now stretches outward into wide, open land, The air grows drier. The hills flatten, the sky becomes a great bowl of blue overhead. Here the wind carries dust and distant scents of spice and animals, the smell of journeys that last many days and nights. Across this land moved a long caravan, a line of wagons and animals and people winding slowly like a river of wood and cloth and footsteps. At the head of this caravan rode a trader named Kaito. He sat straight in his saddle, his eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced gaze of someone who had spent many years on the road. Kaito took great pride in his caravan. To him, it was not just a group of wagons, it was a single, solid thing. His work, his creation, his success. He had designed its routes, chosen its guards, inspected its goods. He knew the names of all his workers. When he spoke of it, he called it my caravan, the way someone might speak of my house or my body. It felt stable to him, reliable, a moving fortress of trade. One evening, after many days of travel, the caravan stopped near a small oasis. Animals drank at the edge of the water, tents rose in practiced motions. Fires flickered into life as the sun slid down and the sky turned soft with colors of evening. Kaito walked through the camp, inspecting as he always did. He checked the ropes on the wagons, the locks on the chests, the condition of the wheels. Everything seemed in order. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, there was a faint restlessness he could not name. It had followed him for years now. Even when profits were good and journeys were safe, he felt a strange unease, as if he were trying to hold something still that refused to stop moving. At the edge of the oasis, he noticed someone sitting alone beneath a scraggly date palm. It was an older man he had hired for this journey as a simple hand. The man's name was Joran. He drove one of the wagons and rarely spoke unless spoken to. There was something about his face, though, that made Kaito curious. Lines of age, yes, but also a softness in the eyes that did not match the harshness of the road. Right now, Joran was watching the caravan with a calm expression, as if he were looking at something both familiar and always new. Kaito walked over and sat down beside him. For a while, they said nothing. The night grew darker. The fires inside the camp cast warm circles of light. Kaito followed Joran's gaze, expecting to see something unusual. Instead, he saw what he always saw: wagons, people, animals, the usual scene of evening rest. "You seem very interested in what you see," Kaito said at last. Joran smiled. "I am," he replied. "Every night it is different." Kaito raised an eyebrow. "Different," he said. "No, my friend, that is where you are mistaken. My caravan is what you see. It is always the same. The same wagons, the same structure, the same order. That is why it succeeds. It is dependable." Joran turned his head slowly to look at him. "Is it?" he asked gently. "Let us look together." Kaito felt a touch of pride. He liked speaking about his caravan. He pointed with his hand. "There is the first wagon," he said. "I had it built 10 years ago. It has crossed many deserts. It is part of what makes this caravan mine." Joran nodded. 10 years, he repeated. "And in those 10 years have the wheels remained the same? The boards, the axles?" Kaito thought back. "Of course not," he said. "We have replaced parts many times, new wheels, new boards. We repair what breaks, what wears out. But it is still the same wagon." Joran's eyes softened. "Is it?" he asked. "Or is it a series of wagons, each replacing the last piece by piece, so smoothly that you call them one? When you say that wagon, and what do you mean? The boards that are there now? The ones that were there 2 years ago? The ones that will be there next year? Which one is the real one?" Kaito frowned, feeling a bit annoyed by what sounded like word games. "You are playing with thoughts," he said. Everyone does this. Things change, but we still call them by one name. What is the point of questioning that? Jorn did not argue. He simply turned his eyes back toward the camp. Look at the people, he said. When you first began this work, were any of these workers with you? Kaito followed his gaze. He saw men and women moving through the camp. Some were newer. Some had been with him for a few years. But yes, he realized none of the original group remained. One had married and settled in a distant town. Another had grown too old for the road and retired. A few had died. Others had simply drifted away. No, Kaito admitted. The caravan used to have different people, but that does not change the fact that this is my caravan. The structure, the purpose, the name, those are the same. Joran nodded thoughtfully. So, he said, the wagons do not stay the same. The workers do not stay the same. What about the goods you carry? Do they remain? Kaito almost laughed. Of course not, he said. That would be terrible for business. We sell what we carry, buy something new and move on. The goods are always changing. That is the point. Joran gave a small smile. Then tell me, he said softly, what is this caravan that you say is so solid and unchanging? The wagons are changing, the people are changing, the goods are changing. Even the roads you travel are sometimes new. Year by year, almost every piece that makes up what you call my caravan is replaced. Yet you still hold in your mind the image of one fixed thing. You cling to that image as if it could not move. No wonder your heart is tired. You are trying to freeze something that is made of movement. Kaito opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. He looked more closely at the camp. A woman laughed by the fire. A boy carried a bucket of water. A man checked the harness on a horse. Somewhere a pot boiled. In the shadows, someone was already sleeping. The scene shifted with every passing breath. A few years ago, this exact arrangement of faces and objects had never existed. In a few years, it would not exist again. He felt a strange sensation, as if the ground beneath his thoughts had shifted slightly. If everything is changing, he said slowly, then what am I leading? What am I protecting? What am I so afraid of losing? Joran's eyes shone softly in the firelight. You are leading a pattern, he said. A flow, a temporary gathering of people and things moving along the same road for a while. It is real, it matters, but it is not solid in the way you imagine. You can guide it, you can care for it, but you cannot keep it from changing because it is made of change. Kaito felt a familiar resistance rise within him. He had spent much of his life trying to build something that would last, something firm and reliable. The idea that his caravan was not a single enduring thing, but a shifting collection held together by habit and name, unsettled him. If it is only a pattern, he said, then is it meaningless? Are we all just moving pieces in some empty game? Joran shook his head. Not meaningless, he said gently. Just not solid. There is a difference. Look at the fire over there. Kaito turned his head. Flames danced above one of the campfires. The wood crackled. Sparks rose and vanished into the night. What do you see? Joran asked. A fire, Kaito replied. Of course. Yes, Joran said, Poronawan, but what is that fire? It is wood changing into heat and light. It is air feeding flame. It is movement. It is process. You can point to it and say, that is our fire. You can warm your hands. You can cook your food. The experience is real. But if you try to take that fire and put it in a box to keep it forever, what happens? You cannot freeze it without killing it. Its nature is to change. To cling to it as something fixed is to misunderstand what it is. Kaito watched the flames. He imagined trying to hold them, to fix them in a shape. It was a foolish image. Yet had he not done the same with his caravan, with his idea of himself as its leader? He had treated it as a permanent structure, something that must not change, and whenever life proved otherwise, he felt anxiety clutch at his chest. "So what should I do?" he asked quietly. "Stop caring. Stop trying to lead. Just say all is empty and walk away." Jorn's laugh was soft and kind. "No," he replied. "That would be another mistake. Emptiness is not nothingness. It is the understanding that everything you love is made of parts that come together and drift apart. It is seeing that no thing stands alone. Your caravan exists because of roads and markets and craftspeople and animals and weather and the bodies and minds of those who walk beside you. You are part of that web. When you see this, you can still care, but you care with a lighter grip. You lead, but you do not believe that you own the river of change. You are simply moving with it more wisely." Kaito sat in silence, feeling the words wash through him. He thought of years when unexpected illness had forced them to change plans, of times when a broken wheel had turned into a new friendship with someone who helped, of seasons when the caravan had shrunk or grown depending on fortunes. Through it all, he had carried an image of his caravan like a stone inside his mind, something fixed he had to protect. He had never considered that this stone did not match the living reality, and that this mismatch was part of what made him so uneasy. That night, as he lay under the canvas of his tent, Kaito listened to the sounds of the camp settling into sleep. A cough here, a murmur there, the shifting of a horse's hooves, the crackle of the last bits of firewood. He realized that even this night, this very arrangement of sound and breath and presence would never come again in exactly this way. And instead of that thought making him afraid, it brought a quiet tenderness. Life was not a solid object he could put on a shelf. It was more like the caravan itself, always moving, always changing shapes, always coming together and then drifting apart. His job, he began to sense, was not to make it unchanging, but to walk with it while it passed through his hands. As you lie here, feeling your own breath move in and out, you might notice something similar. This body you call mine is also a kind of caravan. Cells dying and being born, thoughts rising and fading, feelings shifting from hour to hour. It can be frightening to see that nothing stands still, but it can also be freeing. You do not have to hold everything in place. You can ride the movement with a little more trust. In the next part of our journey, we will leave the open road and step into a small workshop, where a weaver begins to see that every thread in his cloth is connected to countless lives, and that nothing he creates is truly separate or alone. From the dusty road where Kaito watched his caravan dissolve into movement and change, our path now turns into a quieter street, where the air smells not of sand and animals, but of dye, cotton, and warm steam. Somewhere far from the desert, in a humble town lined with small shops, there was a narrow building with a wooden sign that read simply, "Osamu's Weaving." Inside that shop, day after day, sat a man at a loom. His name was Osamu. His hands were rough from work, but his movements were precise, almost musical. The loom took up most of the room. Wooden beams, tight strings, bundles of thread hanging nearby like small waterfalls of color. When the morning light entered through the paper window, it fell across the loom and the man, turning each movement into a quiet dance. Osamu had learned to weave from his father, who had learned from his father before him. For years, this work had given him a simple satisfaction. Thread after thread, row after row, he watched patterns appear where there had been only empty space. Customers came to buy cloth for clothes, for blankets, for banners. They praised his steady hand, his reliable patterns, his durable fabric. Osamu nodded politely, accepted their coins, and returned to the loom. Lately, though, something inside him had begun to stir. The work felt heavier than it used to, not in his muscles, but in his heart. He would sometimes pause with his foot on the pedal, his hand on the shuttle, and feel an emptiness he could not explain. Is this all my life is, he would wonder. Threads and patterns and customers and coins, morning after morning, year after year. One afternoon, a traveling monk came into the shop. He wore simple robes faded by many roads and carried a small cloth bag on his shoulder. His face was neither young nor old. He had the look of someone who had seen much and still knew there was more to see. He stood quietly watching Osamu work. The loom clacked and shifted under the weaver's hands, the threads tightening into a growing sheet of cloth. After a while, Osamu noticed the presence at the door. He lifted his head. "Can I help you?" he asked. The monk smiled. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps I am here to watch you help the world without knowing it." Osamu frowned lightly, unsure whether the man was teasing him. "I am only making cloth," he said. "I doubt the world notices." The monk stepped closer, his eyes resting on the weaving in progress. "May I ask you a question?" he said. Osamu shrugged. "If it does not stop the loom for too long," he replied. The monk's smile widened just a little. "When you look at this cloth," he asked, "what do you see?" Osamu glanced at his work. "I see a piece of fabric," he said. "Strong, even useful, nothing special." "And what is it made of?" the monk continued. "Thread," Osamu answered, slightly impatient now. "Many threads crossing over and under each other. That is all weaving is." "And the threads," the monk said, "what are they made of?" Osamu sighed. "Fibers," he said. "Cotton in this case. And the cotton comes from plants. I do not grow them myself. I buy from a supplier." The monk nodded as if this answer satisfied him. But he did not leave. His gaze drifted around the small shop. He looked at the bundles of thread, the worn stool, the window, the broom in the corner. Then he spoke again. "Do you ever see the people inside your cloth?" he asked. Osamu blinked. "The people," he repeated. "No, only patterns." The monk took a breath, his voice growing softer. "The cotton plants needed soil," he said. "Rain, sunlight, the hands of farmers to plant and harvest. Someone carried the bundles from fields to warehouses. Someone loaded them onto carts. Someone guided the animals. Someone spun the fibers into thread, dyed them, dried them, and tied them into the bundles you now use." He touched the edge of the cloth gently. "When you say this is only thread, you speak as if it appeared from nowhere. But if you look closely, you will see the work and lives of countless beings woven into it. Farmers, merchants, dyers, the earth itself, the clouds, the sun. Without all of them, there would be no cloth. When someone wraps this around themselves, they are wearing a tapestry of many lives." Osamu's hands had gone still on the loom. He looked at the cloth again, but it seemed different now, as if a second picture had appeared beneath the first. For a moment he imagined the farmer's hands stained with soil, the warehouse worker lifting heavy sacks, a child helping a parent tie bundles, the rain falling on fields, the wind moving between rows of plants. None of these faces or forces were visible in the threads, yet they were present in every fiber. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a small crack in the dullness that had clouded his work. "I have never thought of it that way," he admitted. "For me, the cloth begins when the thread touches my hand." The monk nodded. "That is how most of us see," he said. "We think our lives begin and end at the edges of our own skin. We call things mine and yours as if there were clear lines. My work, my success, my failure. But if you look closely, you will see that very little is truly separate. Everything is woven from everything else. Even your breath is the gift of countless plants and trees. You inhale what they exhale. They drink the water that once fell as rain from clouds you will never see. You are already part of a great cloth, whether you notice it or not. Osamu shifted on his stool. A part of him felt resistant. If nothing was truly separate, did that mean his effort did not matter? Did it mean his skill was just one more small line in a pattern too large to understand? If everything is connected, he said slowly, then what is the point of my work? Why bother trying to be good at anything? Why not just sit and say, we are all one cloth, and do nothing? The monk chuckled softly. That would be another kind of misunderstanding, he replied. Seeing interconnection is not an excuse to become passive. It is an invitation to care more deeply. When you see that your cloth holds the work of many lives, perhaps you handle it with more respect. When you realize that someone will sleep under it or cover a baby with it, perhaps you weave with more kindness, knowing that your movement will touch someone you may never meet. Understanding that nothing stands alone does not erase your responsibility. It reveals it. Osamu sat quietly, letting this sink in. He thought of the times he had rushed through orders, irritated by deadlines or low prices. He thought of how small his life had felt, trapped between loom and door day after day. Yet now, as he imagined the invisible threads of other lives crossing through his shop, the space around him seemed larger. The walls felt less like limits and more like part of a larger room he could not fully see. You said I helped the world without knowing it, he said after a while. Is this what you meant? The monk's eyes softened. Every person who does their work with awareness, he said, helps the world. You do not need to be a great leader or a famous teacher. You only need to remember that your actions do not end where your hands end. They ripple outward. They touch others. If you weave in anger, that energy travels with the cloth. If you weave with care, that travels too. When someone wraps themselves in your cloth on a cold night and feels safe, you are there with them in a small, quiet way. Osamu looked down at his hands. They were scarred and calloused, fingers slightly bent from years of gripping the shuttle. Suddenly, they felt less like tools and more like bridges. Through them, countless unseen threads moved into form. And what about me? He asked, his voice softer now. Where do I belong in this cloth? The monk looked around the shop once more, then back at him. You are both thread and weaver, he said. You are shaped by forces you did not choose. Your parents, your culture, your time, the people you have met. All of that is woven into who you are. And today, in each small choice, you also become a weaver of the future. The way you speak, the care you give, the attention you bring to each moment. These are threads you send into other lives. You cannot control the whole pattern, but you can choose your own thread. Osamu felt something loosen in his chest, the way a knot slowly gives under patient hands. The dull ache he had felt toward his work did not vanish, but it changed. It was as if someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. The air felt clearer. The loom no longer seemed like a cage. It looked more like a doorway. That evening, after the monk had bowed and left the shop, Osamu returned to his weaving. The loom's rhythm was the same, the sound of wood and thread, foot and pedal. But inside, he felt different. As he guided the shuttle through the warp, he pictured the farmer bending under the sun, the dyer staining the thread with color, the stranger who would one day touch this cloth and perhaps feel comfort. His work no longer felt small. It felt like one visible part of a vast, invisible fabric. Later that night, as he lay down to sleep, he thought of his own life as threads too. Moments of kindness received from others, lessons from mistakes, unexpected help in difficult times. None of them stood alone. Each was connected to someone else's choice, someone else's story. He felt a quiet gratitude rise. not for anything dramatic, but for the simple fact that he existed in this vast weaving at all. As you lie here now, feeling the gentle weight of your body and the rise and fall of your breath, you might sense something similar. Your life, too, is not separate. Every breath you take, every word you speak, every act of patience or impatience, kindness or indifference becomes a thread in a larger cloth. You may never see the full pattern, you do not need to. It is enough to choose your thread with a little more awareness, a little more care. In the next part of our journey, we will step away from looms and caravans and enter a place even more ordinary. A kitchen in a simple courtyard, where a young monk learns that the deepest path is not found in distant mountains, but in the very dust beneath his broom and the steam rising from his pots. From the warm kitchen where Tenzo learned that washing rice could be a doorway, our journey now follows a different kind of longing. The kind that believes peace can only be found far away from people, in a life stripped of noise and dust and complications. Not all seekers stay in the middle of things. Some feel pulled toward the edges of the world, where the air is thin and the wind speaks in its own language. High in the mountains beyond Tenzo's monastery, where the paths grew steep and the air turned cool even in summer, there stood a small hut made of stone and rough wood. It clung to the side of the slope like a bird's nest, simple and exposed. The roof was patched with moss. Smoke sometimes rose in a thin line from a narrow chimney. Inside that hut lived a man named Eshin. He had not always lived alone. Once he had walked through crowded streets, spoken in busy markets, worked in places where voices overlapped and the days passed in a blur of tasks. He had known the weight of other people's expectations, the constant pull of obligations. There had been a time when he thought if he could just get away from it all, he would finally find clarity. So one day, after years of feeling drained and tangled, he left. He climbed the mountain with a small bundle of belongings and a heart full of mixed emotions. Fear, hope, relief. He found the old hut, long abandoned, and decided to make it his home. Up here, there were no noisy neighbors, no merchants calling out prices, no endless requests. Only wind, stone, trees, the wide, open sky. At first, the quiet felt like a miracle. Eshin rose with the sun. He fetched water from a spring. He cooked simple meals over a small fire. He sat for long hours outside the hut, watching clouds drift over the distant valleys. He listened to birds, to the rustle of leaves, to the sound of his own breath. He spent many hours in meditation, following his inhalations and exhalations, watching thoughts rise and fall like waves on a distant sea. The world below, with its arguments and ambitions, began to feel very far away. Months turned into years. Eshin's beard grew long. His clothes grew thin at the elbows. His hands became rough from carrying wood and tending the small patch of soil where he grew a few vegetables. Inside, he felt a quiet deepen. The frantic noise that had once filled his mind softened. There were days when he felt as if the boundary between himself and the mountain had almost disappeared. He would sit in silence and feel not only his own breath but the breath of the wind, the slow heartbeat of the earth beneath him. Yet beneath this peace there was something else, something he almost did not want to look at. A small knot, a tightness that never fully dissolved. It was easy to ignore when the sky was clear and the days moved gently. But sometimes when storms slammed against the mountain, when the wind howled like a living creature and the rain pounded the roof, he would feel a different kind of restlessness. It was not the old restlessness of city life. It was something more subtle, like a voice asking a question he could not quite hear. One autumn, after many years on the mountain, Eshin had an unexpected visitor. He was sitting outside the hut repairing a worn sandal when he heard footsteps on the rocky path. He looked up, surprised. Very few people climbed this high without a reason. A figure appeared between two boulders. It was a younger man, perhaps half Eshen's age, dressed in traveling clothes worn by dust. His face was flushed from the climb, his breath uneven. When he saw Eshen, he bowed deeply. "Master," he said, though Eshen had never called himself that, "I have been searching for you." Eshen tilted his head. "Have you?" he replied. "And why is that?" The young man stepped closer. "I heard," he said, "that you left the world behind to live in silence, that you have spent many years in meditation. I too feel that the world is full of noise and distraction. I wish to escape it. Please teach me how to be free of it all." Eshen studied him for a long moment. He saw the familiar intensity in the younger man's eyes, the same fire that had once burned in his own when he first climbed the mountain. "Sit," Eshen said, gesturing to a flat stone near the hut. The young man sat, catching his breath, looking around as if expecting to see some hidden sign of enlightenment carved into the rocks. "Tell me about this world you wish to escape," Eshen said gently. The young man launched into a fast stream of words. The city was suffocating. People were selfish. The noise never stopped. Everyone seemed obsessed with money, status, appearance. He spoke of betrayals, disappointments, broken promises. "When I am alone," he said, "I feel quieter. When I am with others, my mind fills with irritation and judgment. I want to be done with it, to live above it all." Eshen listened, his face calm. When the younger man finished, Eshen asked a simple question. "And what do you imagine you will find up here?" The young man looked confused. "Freedom," he said. "Purity, the true self. I have read that one must leave the world to see clearly." Eshen nodded slowly. "The mountain is quiet," he said. "It can help you hear yourself more clearly. But tell me, when you are alone, are you truly free of irritation, of judgment, of restlessness? Or do those things still visit you, only now without anyone to blame them on?" The young man opened his mouth, then hesitated. He thought of the times he had gone on short retreats before, how his mind had still found ways to complain even in peaceful surroundings. "They still come," he admitted. "I thought that with more time they might fade." Eshen looked toward the valley below, where faint traces of villages could be seen, tiny clusters of life. "When I first came here," he said, "I believed as you do. I thought the problem was the world, too loud, too demanding, too full of clashing desires. Up here I found silence, space, the chance to become very familiar with my own mind. That has been a gift. But there is something I have learned that I did not expect." He turned back to the young man. "The world did not cause my confusion," he said softly. "It only reflected it. Up here there are no quarrels over money or status, no crowds, no arguments. And yet for many years I still carried anger, fear, pride, and loneliness inside me. The mountain did not erase them. It simply made them harder to ignore." The young man frowned slightly. "Are you saying solitude is useless?" he asked. "No," Eshen replied. "Solitude can be medicine. It can strip away some of the distractions that keep us from seeing ourselves. But it is not escape. If you climb up here to run away from your own heart, you will find that it has followed you. There is no place high enough or deep enough to leave it behind." The wind moved between them, cooler now as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The younger man looked troubled. "Then what should I do?" he asked. "Stay in the noise. Leave it. Which is the true path?" Eshen smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes softening. "The path is not a place," he said. "It is a way of relating. You can be lost in delusion in a cave or in a marketplace. You can practice waking up in a hut or at a busy crossroads. The question is not only where you are, but how you are. Are you present? Are you honest with yourself? Are you willing to meet your own mind again and again without running?" The young man fell silent. Eshin continued. I have learned much here, he said. I have seen how thoughts rise and fall. I have watched old wounds soften. I have tasted a peace that is not dependent on circumstances. But there is something I still do not know, and the mountain cannot teach it to me. The younger man looked up, surprised. What is that? He asked. Eshin's gaze turned toward the faint villages below. How to carry this peace into the noise, he said quietly. How to hold an open heart when faced with other hearts that are hurting, fearful, or angry. Up here, the trees do not insult me. The rocks do not betray my trust. The wind does not argue. It is easy to think I am patient, wise, and kind when nothing challenges me. But what is that worth if it collapses the moment I am among people again? The words hung in the thin air. The younger man shifted, uncertain. So you wish to go back, he said. Eshin nodded, more to himself than to his guest. I have been feeling the pull for some time, he admitted. At first I ignored it, telling myself that the world below was a distraction. But the more I sit, the clearer it becomes. Real practice is not about building a peaceful bubble that no one can disturb. It is about letting this quiet strength flow through me when I am cooking with others, listening to complaints, watching suffering I cannot fix, and still not turning away. The younger man looked out at the valley, imagining the crowded streets he had wanted so badly to escape. They still seemed heavy. But now they also looked different, as if they were not only the source of his pain, but also the place where his understanding would be tested and made real. I do not know if I am ready to return, Eshin said. But I know this, the path that matters must include both mountain and village, silence and conversation, aloneness and relationship. Otherwise, my peace is only half alive. The younger man felt something soften in his chest, a recognition he did not entirely like but could not deny. He had hoped the mountain would offer a clean break from his struggles, a place where he could become pure and stay that way. Now he saw that purity without contact was fragile, like a flower grown under glass, beautiful but easily broken by the first real wind. They sat together until the light began to fade. At last the younger man stood. Will you teach me? He asked quietly. Eshin smiled. For tonight, he said, I will share this hut and this meal with you. We can sit together and watch our minds. But know that whatever you learn here must one day walk back down that path with you. Do not come to the mountain to hide. Come to see more clearly, then go and live what you see. That night, as they sat in silence, the wind brushed against the hut like a soft hand. Eshin felt a deep gratitude for all the years of solitude. He also felt a calm readiness, like a river that had lingered in still water and now remembered it was meant to move. As you rest now, perhaps you can feel both of these movements within yourself. The part of you that longs to escape everyone and everything, and the part that knows your heart wants to love and be loved in the middle of this imperfect world. You do not have to choose one and abandon the other. Your bed right now can be your mountain. Your life, with all its noise and relationships, can be your village. The path runs through both. In the next part of our journey, we will return from the high places and step into a world of small moments and simple errands, where an ordinary merchant caught in a sudden storm discovers that the miracle he has been looking for is hidden in the sound of raindrops on a roof and the quiet space inside his own breath. From the high mountain hut where Eshin began to understand that true peace must walk back down into the world. Our path now returns to the lowlands, to streets full of footsteps and voices, to a life that looks simple from the outside but feels crowded from within. In a busy town crossed by narrow alleys and market stalls, there lived a merchant named Saburo. He was not the richest trader in the city, but he was busy enough. His days were full of lists and bargains, deliveries and delays. He knew the weight of every coin in his purse, the price of every item in his shop. and the tension of every debt he owed or was owed. From morning until night, his mind rarely stood still. It jumped from one concern to the next like a bird hopping between branches. If the day went well, he worried about tomorrow. If the day went badly, he replayed every moment, trying to see where he had made a mistake. At night, when he finally lay down, his body was tired, but his thoughts did not agree to rest. He would stare at the ceiling, counting worries instead of sheep. One afternoon, Saburo set out on a short journey to a nearby village where he planned to meet a supplier. The sky was gray but calm when he left the town, his cart creaking gently behind him. The road passed through fields and small clusters of trees. Saburo walked with his usual half-focused attention, part of his mind on the path, most of it on his plans. Would the supplier raise prices? Would the goods arrive on time? How could he increase profit without losing customers? The questions circled in his head like a team of tired horses pulling the same old wagon. By the time he reached the halfway point, the air had changed. The wind grew cooler. The clouds thickened and lowered, heavy with unshed rain. Saburo glanced up with a frown. "Not today," he muttered, as if the sky could hear him and rearrange its plans. A few drops fell, dark spots on the dusty road. He quickened his pace. The village was still some distance away, and the thought of arriving soaked made his shoulders tense. Within moments, the sky opened. Rain poured down in a sudden curtain, the kind that does not ask permission. The road turned slick under his feet. The dry fields darkened as water ran in thin streams between the furrows. Saburo pulled his cloak tighter, but it did little to stop the wet. His hair clung to his forehead, his shoes filled with water. He looked around for shelter and saw a small wayside shrine a short distance off the road, a simple wooden structure with a slanted roof and a stone statue inside, worn smooth by years of wind and prayer. He hurried toward it, guiding his cart to a stop beside the path, and stepped under the roof's narrow protection. The space was just big enough for one person to stand without being soaked. The rain fell around him like a moving wall. Water drummed on the roof. It splashed in small explosions on the ground. The fields blurred beyond the falling sheets. Saburo let out a frustrated breath. "Of all days," he muttered, shaking water from his sleeves. He thought of the meeting he might miss, the lost time, the delayed deals. His mind raced ahead, turning this simple storm into a chain of problems that reached all the way into his imagined future. His chest tightened. His jaw clenched. For a few minutes he did nothing but argue silently with the weather. Eventually his thoughts ran out of breath like a fire that has burned through all its wood. He had no choice but to wait. The road was too muddy, the rain too strong. He could not hurry the sky. He could not push the clouds away with his worry. Slowly, a different kind of awareness crept in, the way a quiet guest might enter a room after the loud ones have left. Saburo noticed the sound of the rain more clearly, not as background noise, but as a living thing. There was the steady drumming on the wooden roof, deep and hollow. The sharper patter on the leaves of the tree beside the shrine, the softer hiss where the water met the already wet earth. There were layers to it, rhythms he had never really heard, though he had stood in rain many times before. He realized that for once he had nowhere else to be, no one to talk to, nothing to arrange, no choice but to stand there and listen. His breath, which had been short and tight, began to lengthen without him forcing it. In, out, in, out. The sound of the rain and the sound of his breath began to weave together like two instruments in the same simple song. He looked around the small shelter. The wooden posts were darkened by years of weather. The stone statue inside the shrine, its features softened by time, gazed out with the same calm expression it had worn on sunny days and stormy nights alike. Saburo studied its face, not smiling, not frowning, just present. A thought rose in him, quieter than his usual thoughts. The statue does not ask the rain to stop. It does not rush the sun to return. It does not measure its worth by how dry or wet it is. It simply stands. He felt a strange softness in his chest, something like envy and something like recognition. How long had it been since he had allowed himself to simply stand without trying to bend the world around his wishes? He noticed then that his mind had been silent for a few breaths, occupied only by the sound of rain and the feel of his own breathing. The usual swarm of what if and what next had retreated, not permanently but far enough that he could feel a new kind of space inside. A question rose within him, not sharp, not urgent. What is actually wrong in this moment right now? Not in my plans, not in my imagination, in this exact breath. He looked honestly. His clothes were wet, yes, but he was not freezing. His cart was safe by the road. His body, though tired, was not in pain. The supplier might be annoyed by a delay, but the meeting could be moved. For this one small slice of time, the only real fact was this: he was standing under a roof, listening to rain, breathing. The rest was story. The rest was projection. The discovery did not fix his life or erase his responsibilities, but it did something else. It loosened the grip of his thoughts, just a little. He took another breath, feeling the air travel all the way down to his belly, then out again. He let his shoulders drop. He listened more deeply to the rain. Each drop a tiny impact, a tiny sound, a tiny moment of now. For the first time in a long while, Saburo was not living 10 steps ahead of himself. He was not rerunning yesterday or rehearsing tomorrow. He was simply inside this one breath, this one shelter, this one storm. Time felt different there. Not stretched and thin, not crowded and harsh. Just present. The statue watched. The rain fell. Saburo felt something he had been unconsciously chasing for years without knowing its true shape. A simple, unremarkable peace that did not depend on things going his way. It was not dramatic. It did not come with fireworks of insight. It felt more like slipping into warm water after standing for hours in the cold. Ordinary. Kind. Real. After a while, the rain began to soften. The harsh drumming shifted to a gentler patter. The shapes of the fields came back into focus beyond the thinning curtain. Saburo stepped out from under the roof. The air smelled of wet soil and clean leaves. Puddles reflected the sky, now a lighter gray. He checked his cart. Nothing was damaged. The wheels were muddy but still sound. He placed his hand on the wooden edge and paused. Something in him did not want to rush back into the old rhythm, the constant sprint inside his mind. He knew the worries would return, the plans, the calculations. That was part of his life. But now he also knew, in a way he had not felt before, that there was another layer beneath it all, a quieter place that existed even in the middle of storms, whether he remembered to visit it or not. As he began to walk again, Saburo carried the memory of that stillness like a small candle in his chest. He did not need to protect it by avoiding all difficulties. He only needed to remember from time to stop pushing and listen. Listen to his breath, to the sounds around him, to the simple truth that in each moment beneath the stories there was just this: a body, a breath, a bit of sky, and the chance to rest for a heartbeat inside what is. When he reached the village much later than planned, the supplier was waiting, a little irritated at first, but quickly calmed by Saburo's simple apology. The deal was made. The goods were loaded. Life went on. From the outside, nothing much had changed, but inside something had shifted. That night, back in his own bed, when his mind began its familiar circling, Saburo remembered the sound of the rain on the shrine roof. He placed a hand on his chest, felt his breath, and asked himself again, right now, in this exact moment, what is actually wrong? The answers grew quieter. Sleep found him more easily than usual, drawn toward the space he had opened under that storm. As you lie here, you might let yourself do what Saburo did without knowing he was practicing. Feel your breath. Listen to the sounds around you, however small. Ask in this one simple now, what is truly wrong? Not in the whole story of your life, but in this breath. You may discover that even if many things need care and change, there is a small island of okayness here, a place for your mind to rest. In the next part of our journey, we will walk beside another traveler, someone who spends years searching for the perfect vessel to carry him across the water, only to discover that what he longed for was already waiting in the boat he had known all his life, the boat that was already enough. From the small shrine where Saburo first allowed the rain to speak to him, our path now follows the line of a river, moving calmly between fields and villages, carrying boats that come and go like passing thoughts. Along this river lived a man named Hideki. He had grown up beside the water, listening to its sounds as a child, watching small fishing boats slide by, their wooden hulls worn smooth by years of use. His father had owned one such boat, plain and sturdy with a few old patches, a floor that creaked in certain places, and oars that had been replaced more than once. To others it was nothing special. To Hideki as a boy it was a little world of its own. He spent many mornings helping his father push off from the bank, feeling the cool splash of water against his legs. They would glide into the current, the boat rocking gently, the shore slowly drifting away behind them. Sometimes there was good fishing. Sometimes the nets came up nearly empty. But the boy did not measure those days in weight or number. He measured them in moments. The call of birds, the play of sunlight on the ripples, the quiet way his father would tilt his head, listening to the water as if it were telling a story. As Hideki grew older, he began to notice what other people had. Larger boats, newer boats, boats with bright paint and clever designs, boats that could travel farther and carry more. He heard men in the village talk about faster vessels, smoother rides, more efficient oars. Slowly, a thought began to form in his mind. Our boat is small, he told himself, ordinary, worn. One day I will build or buy the perfect boat, and then my real life on the river will begin. The thought stayed with him as he became a young man and took over more of the river work. He still used his father's boat, still knew exactly how it moved under his feet, how it leaned into the current, how it responded to the rhythm of his arms. But satisfaction began to dry a little in his chest. Each time he pushed away from the riverbank, he also pushed away a quiet unease, whispering that this was not yet good enough. One year, after a season of hard work and careful saving, Hideki decided he would begin his search. He told his father that he wanted to find a better boat, one that could carry him not just along the familiar stretch of river, but farther downstream, maybe even to the great cities near the sea. His father listened with kind eyes and said little, only nodding slowly. "The river has many boats," he said. "Look, if you feel you must. Just remember that it is the river you are traveling on, not the idea in your head." Hideki took those words as a gentle blessing and set out. For a while he kept using the old boat for daily work, but whenever he had time he visited other villages along the river, watching the boats tied to their posts, asking questions, running his hand along their edges. Some were finely crafted, sleek and beautiful. Some were strong and broad, built to carry heavy loads. He studied them with a restless eye. This one is almost right, he would think, but perhaps a little too heavy. That one is elegant, but the wood seems thin. Another is sturdy, but its oars feel wrong in his hands. Always there was something not quite perfect. He told himself he was being wise, not hasty. The right boat, he believed, must feel perfect in every way. Months turned into years. Hideki's search became part of his identity. People along the river came to know him as the man always looking for the best boat. Some admired his standards. Others silently wondered if he would ever be satisfied. All the while, his father's boat kept waiting by the bank, carrying him day after day through work and weather, through misty mornings and glowing sunsets. He used it with practiced ease, but now always with one eye on the shore, looking past the boat he was in toward the boat he had not yet found. One autumn evening, after another long day of travel and inquiry, Hideki returned to his village tired and disappointed. He had visited a town rumored to have excellent boat builders. He had inspected their work closely. The boats were beautiful. They were strong. The builders spoke proudly of their craft. Yet as Hideki ran his hand along the smooth wood, he felt that same quiet dissatisfaction. It is close, he thought, but still not the one. The sky was darkening when he reached the familiar bend in the river near his home. Mist was beginning to rise from the water, drifting in soft ribbons. His father's old boat waited at its post, just as it always had. For some reason, instead of going straight home, Hideki untied the boat and stepped in. He settled onto the worn seat, feeling the wood give slightly under his weight in the way it always did. Without thinking much about it, he pushed away from the bank and let the boat ease into the current. The river was quiet. No other boats moved on its surface now. The village lights glowed faintly in the distance. The water made soft sounds against the hull. Hideki picked up the oars and began to row, but not with his usual urgency. His arms moved more slowly. He was not trying to get anywhere in particular. For the first time in a long time, he let the river set the pace. As he moved, he began to notice details he had long overlooked. The familiar creak of the wood beneath him, not unpleasant, just a soft voice of age. The way the boat rocked gently when he shifted his weight, in a rhythm his body had unconsciously learned years ago. The slight delay between his pulling on the oars and the boat's response. A delay that he had learned to anticipate without thought. Each small movement, each small sound spoke of a long relationship between his body, the boat, and the water. He realized with a quiet start that in all his searching he had never felt so perfectly able to predict how any new boat would behave. This one, worn and patched, fit him like a well-used tool, like a shoe shaped by years of walking. He rested the oars across his knees and let the current carry him. The boat drifted, turning slowly as the water moved. He looked at its surface in the fading light. Here, a place where the wood had been replaced. There, a patch his father had made long ago after a hidden rock scraped the hull. Each mark was a memory. A storm survived, a journey completed, a day's work done. For years he had seen only flaws. Now for a moment he saw a story, a life shared between vessel and family and river. A feeling rose in his chest that he did not recognize at first. Something like sorrow for the way he had ignored this quiet companionship, and something like gratitude that the boat had not resented him. It had simply kept doing its work, carrying him every time he stepped inside without asking for praise or approval. Hideki closed his eyes and listened. The small splash of water against the sides, the distant call of an evening bird, his own steady breath. In that simple soundscape, a soft understanding unfolded. All this time he thought, I believed my peace depended on a perfect boat that did not yet exist. I postponed my contentment into the future, into a shape my mind had drawn, and while I chased that idea, I rode in a real boat, on a real river, in a real life that I barely noticed. The river did not care whether his boat was old or new, plain or beautiful. It moved beneath them just the same. The oars did not demand perfection from his hands. They simply answered his pull. The only place where the lack of a perfect boat existed was inside his own thoughts. He opened his eyes and looked around. The river, the mist, the fading light, the old boat, his own body breathing in this cool air. This was his life, not an almost life, not a waiting room for something better. This, only this. He let his fingertips brush the water. It was cool and strangely intimate, as if the river were gently greeting him after a long absence. A quiet smile touched his face, not a wide grin but a small, honest curve born from seeing something simple and clear. The boat did not suddenly become new. It still had its patches. The wood was still worn in places, but something in his relationship with it shifted. The boat was no longer a placeholder for an imaginary future. It was his companion right now, fitting him in a way no perfect image ever could. When he returned to the shore that evening, his father was waiting, sitting on an upturned bucket watching the water. Hideki tied the boat and climbed out. For a moment he simply stood there, looking at the vessel he had known all his life. His father watched him quietly. "Did you find your perfect boat?" the old man asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Hideki took a slow breath. "Yes," he said softly, "though not in the way I expected." He rested his hand on the side of the old boat, feeling the roughness of the wood, the familiar give under his palm. "I think," he added, "it has been waiting for me to notice it all along." His father nodded as if he had been waiting to hear exactly those words. "The river is kind," he said. "It allows us to learn in our own time. Some people chase better boats for a lifetime and never sit quietly in the ones they already have." That night, as Hideki lay in bed, he felt a new kind of ease in his body. The search inside him, always humming in the background like a restless drum, had grown quieter. He still had dreams of traveling farther one day. He still cared about building things well. But now he understood something deeper. There will always be a better boat in the mind. The question is not whether you have the best one, but whether you are truly present in the one you are in. As you rest now, you might look gently at the boats in your own life, the home you live in, the work you do, the body you inhabit, the relationships you have. Perhaps there is a part of you that has been waiting for a future version of them before allowing yourself to relax. Tonight you do not have to force gratitude. You do not have to pretend everything is perfect. You are simply invited to notice what is already here, carrying you, perhaps more faithfully than you have realized. In the next part of our journey, we will meet two men living side by side, one surrounded by wealth yet haunted by a sense of lack, the other with little but somehow rich in quiet contentment. And we will listen to what their lives reveal about the difference between having enough and feeling enough. From the quiet river where Hideki finally sat inside the boat that had always carried him. Our journey now moves into a town where two small houses stand close together, their walls sharing the same morning light and evening shadows. Yet the hearts inside them live in very different worlds. In a modest neighborhood of narrow streets and low roofs lived a man named Jun. By most measures, Jun was successful. He owned a small business that had grown steadily over the years. He had a sturdy house with tiled floors, a good roof, and a gate that closed smoothly. Inside there were fine cushions, polished wooden tables, shelves with small ornaments he had collected over time. He had more than enough food, a closet of decent clothes, and a heavy purse in a box beneath his bed. People in the neighborhood would point to his house and say, "Jun has done well for himself." Yet inside Jun's chest there was a constant tightness, as if a hand were slowly squeezing his heart. It did not matter how many coins lay in his box, how many nice things filled his rooms. When he woke each morning, his very first thought was almost always the same. It is not enough. His mind immediately began to calculate. If he worked a little harder, he could expand his business. If he expanded his business, he might earn more. If he earned more, he could buy that bigger house he had seen in another part of town, the one with the taller walls and the garden in front. Then, he told himself, maybe he would feel safe. Maybe he would finally be able to relax. These thoughts followed him throughout the day like a shadow. When he sat at his table to eat, he thought about better meals he might afford someday. When he walked past shops, he noticed things he did not yet own. Even when he was praised for his success, he brushed it aside inside his mind. If only they knew how far I still have to go, he would think. At night, when the street grew quiet and he lay in his comfortable bed, his body ready for rest, his mind marched on. What if business slowed? What if another merchant opened a shop nearby? What if illness or age took away his ability to work? The comfort he had built felt fragile, like a house of paper standing in a strong wind. Next door to June lived a man named Taro. Taro's house was smaller, its roof patched in places. The walls showed a few cracks that had been repaired with rough plaster. Inside, the furniture was simple and worn from years of use. There were no special ornaments on his shelves, only a few necessary items. Taro worked as a porter, carrying loads for others in the market. His pay was modest. Some days he earned enough to buy fresh vegetables and rice. Some days he made less and ate more simply. He did not have a heavy purse under his bed, only a small jar with a few coins for emergencies. From the outside, most people would say June was rich and Taro was poor, but inside their minds, the story ran differently. Each morning, Taro woke to the pale light coming through his thin curtains and listened for a moment. Birds, distant voices, the first sounds of carts moving on the street. He would take a breath and stretch, feeling his body. If nothing ached too sharply, he would smile to himself. Another day I can walk, he would think. Another day I can work. Good. His house was small, but it did not feel like a prison to him. It felt like a place where he could rest from the world, where the walls knew him. The patched roof made small sounds when it rained, and he liked that sound. It reminded him of his father repairing it, of hands that had cared for this small space before him. Taro did sometimes wish for easier days, for a little more money, for a roof that did not leak at all. But those wishes drifted through him like clouds. He did not let them sit on his chest like heavy stones. Whenever he began to think too much about what was missing, he would look around at what was already there. A bowl of warm rice, the warmth of his own breath on a cold morning, the laughter of a neighbor's child running down the street. For now, he would tell himself, this is enough. When it changes, I will meet that day when it comes. One evening, a heavy rain swept through the town. The sky darkened quickly. Water drummed on roofs and splashed in the muddy street. Jun sat inside his house at a polished table, eating a good meal. The roof above him did not leak. The walls kept out the wind. Yet he barely tasted his food. He was studying numbers on a piece of paper, thinking of ways to increase his profits next season. Every time his mind whispered, "At least you are dry and safe tonight," another voice replied. "Yes, but you still have less than that man with the 3-story house near the big road. Until you reach that level, you cannot rest." Next door, in the smaller house, Taro did have a leak. A thin line of water had begun to drip from the corner of the ceiling into a clay pot he had placed beneath it long ago. The drip was steady, a soft tapping sound. Taro sat on his mat with a simple bowl of soup in his hands. He watched the candlelight flicker and dance on the wall. The leak annoyed him a little, but he also knew that the patch he had made last year had held through many storms. This small drip, he told himself, I can manage. He took a bite and felt the warmth move into his belly. Outside, thunder rolled softly. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the layers of sound. Rain on the roof. The occasional wagon creaking past. A dog barking far away. The steady rhythm of his own breath. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not a wild joy. Just a gentle sense that this moment, with all its imperfections, was alive and real in his. The next morning, the rain had passed. The street outside was wet and shining in the early light. Jun stepped out of his gate and saw Taro adjusting the clay pot under his leek, now only dripping slowly. For a moment, the two men stood outside their houses side by side, each glancing at the other's home. Jun's eyes took in the patched roof, the cracked wall, the simple door. He felt a small surge of relief mixed with superiority. At least, he thought, I am not struggling like that. That would be unbearable. Taro's eyes traveled over Jun's well-built house, its strong gate, its neat windows. He thought briefly, it must be nice not to worry about leaks. Then he saw Jun's face more closely, the furrow in his brow, the tightness around his mouth, the way his eyes seemed to always be calculating something unseen. The thought passed through Taro's mind like a quiet bird. It must be heavy to carry so many invisible loads. Good morning, Taro said aloud, bowing his head lightly. Good morning, Jun replied almost out of habit. He did not linger. His mind was already jumping ahead to the day's tasks, the deals he needed to secure, the people he needed to impress. As he walked away, he thought, I must work harder so I can move to a better neighborhood one day. Taro watched him go, then turned back to his small house. He stepped inside and looked around. The pot under the leak, the worn table, the simple bed rolled up in the corner. He felt a small ache for the things he did not have, just for a breath. Then he took a slow inhale, feeling the air expand his chest, and let it out. For now, he repeated quietly to himself, this is enough. Time passed. Jun's business grew. He earned more, bought more, added more to his house. New decorations, a bigger bed, a nicer table. Each purchase gave him a brief thrill, a small wave of satisfaction that quickly drained away, leaving the old emptiness exposed again. The line of enough moved with every new gain. When he reached it, it had already moved ahead. Taro's life also shifted, but more gently. Some years were harder, some a little easier. He sometimes wished for relief from the constant work, from the worry of sickness that could quickly drain his small savings. But he also noticed that there were always small gifts scattered through his days. A cool breeze on a hot afternoon, an extra bowl of food shared by a kind neighbor, the feeling of tired muscles resting after a long day, like a warm heaviness in his limbs that reminded him he had lived another full day. One evening, an old monk passed through the neighborhood and was invited to share tea in a small gathering. Both Jun and Taro attended out of curiosity. They sat among a few other neighbors on low stools as the monk spoke. His words were simple. He talked about how the mind is always moving, always wanting, always comparing, about how it says, I will rest when, and then never really arrives. There are two kinds of poverty, the monk said. One is having little, the other is never feeling that what you have is enough. Between the two, the second can be more painful because it is a thirst that no amount of water seems to satisfy. Jun felt a prickle of recognition but pushed it away, telling himself the monk was speaking about people with far less than him. Taro felt the words land gently in his chest. He thought of his cracked wall, his patched roof, his tired feet, and the strange, quiet gratitude that often visited him in the middle of these very things. Contentment is not closing your eyes to pain or pretending everything is perfect, the monk continued. It is the ability to say in this moment, with this breath, with what I have and do not have, I allow myself to rest for a heartbeat. I do not postpone my right to feel alive until the world matches my idea. Jun went home that night and lay awake, thinking of the bigger house he still wanted, the investments he still needed to make. The monk's words hovered at the edge of his mind but could not yet land. Taro went home and lay on his simple mat. The leak did not drip that night. The sky was clear. He listened to the silence and felt his own breathing. Just for now, he whispered into the dark, I will not chase anything. I will let this be enough. His body relaxed. Sleep came gently. As you rest now, you might feel the two rooms living quietly inside you. One room is always saying, not yet, not enough, not here. The other, smaller but very real, is capable of saying, for this breath, for this heartbeat, I allow this to be enough. You do not have to choose one forever. You only have to visit the second room more often to remember how it feels. In the next part of our journey, we will step back from these stories and begin to weave them together, seeing how the farmer, the scholar, the seeker at the gate, the archer, the gardener, the trader, the weaver, the monk in the kitchen, the hermit, the merchant in the storm, the man in the old boat, and the two neighbors all point toward the same quiet doorway waiting inside your own life. By now, our journey has carried you through many lives. A farmer staring at a ruined field, a scholar buried under his own thoughts, a man searching for a gate that was never there, an archer who forgot how to be a beginner, a gardener afraid of storms, a trader trying to hold his caravan still, a weaver who could not see the world in his cloth, a young monk in a smoky kitchen, a hermit high on the mountain, a merchant trapped in his own worries under the rain, a man who chased the perfect boat, two neighbors living side by side, one always haunted by lack, the other quietly resting in enough. On the surface, their stories are different. They live in different places, they have different work, they carry different burdens. Yet beneath all these details, there is a thread that runs through every one of them. It is the same thread that runs through your life too, even now, as you lie here listening. If you look with gentle eyes, you can begin to feel what that thread is. The farmer fought the sky until he realized he was exhausted from trying to control what he could not. The scholar filled his mind with wisdom, but had forgotten how to taste his own food. The seeker on the beach believed there was a gate between him and peace until he saw that the only barrier was his own story. The archer turned his art into a test he had to pass, until a child skipping stones reminded him, only this one. The gardener tried to freeze his beautiful creation in time until the storm taught him that living things must breathe and change. The trader clung to the idea of my caravan as if it were solid, until he saw that everything in it was already flowing. The weaver thought he was making simple cloth until he saw the hands and lives woven into every thread. The young monk believed the path was somewhere far from the kitchen until he learned to bring his mind home to each grain of rice. The hermit climbed the mountain to escape confusion and found that his own mind had climbed with him, waiting to be met. The merchant under the rain discovered that beneath all his worries there was a small, silent island of okayness in this one breath. The man in the old boat chased a perfect future vessel and finally realized that the boat he had was already carrying him. The rich neighbor with the tight chest and the poor neighbor with the soft eyes revealed that wealth without contentment can feel like a cage, while simplicity with gratitude can feel strangely spacious. Again and again in each story, the same quiet wisdom appears in different clothes. It says softly, you do not have to fight life so hard. You do not have to wait for some perfect moment before you are allowed to rest. You do not have to hold everything together with your thoughts. You do not have to believe every story your mind tells about how far away peace is. It also says just as softly, everything is already moving. Your plans, your possessions, your relationships, your own body. You cannot stop this movement by worrying about it. You cannot freeze time with effort, but you can learn to ride the flow with a lighter heart. As you lie here now, feel how your own life touches these stories. Perhaps, like Aaron the farmer, you have had seasons when you did everything you could and things still did not go the way you hoped. You might have blamed yourself, blamed the sky, blamed fate. You might have believed that if you could just think harder, plan better, you could stop all storms. Maybe part of you is still standing there in that muddy field, asking why the clouds did not obey you. And yet, somewhere inside, there is also Dai, the older farmer, who understands that his work and the sky's work are not the same. You may feel Kenshi, the scholar, moving inside you too. The part of you that reads, learns, analyzes, gathers ideas about healing, spirituality, success, improvement. The part that can explain things beautifully yet still lies awake at night because the knowledge has not yet settled into your bones. That part of you may be ready, like Kenshi, to put down the scrolls for a moment and actually taste your food, feel your breath, and let your body be more than just a vehicle for your thinking. Somewhere in you there might also be Rio, the one who believes he is always one step away from truly arriving. The part that says, when I fix this, then I will be peaceful. When I reach that goal, then I will rest. When I become that person, then I will be worthy. Rio spends years searching for a gate that the old man on the shore shows him was never really there. Perhaps you are beginning to feel that some of the gates in your own mind are like that too. They feel solid, but when you look closely, you see they are made of your own beliefs about not yet. You might feel Haru, the archer in you, whenever you are harsh with yourself. When you think, I should know how to do this by now. I should not make mistakes. I should be better. That heavy voice of the expert in your head can make everything tight. Yet the child by the river reminds Haru, and maybe you, that life is lived one stone, one arrow, one breath at a time. Only this one, not all at once. Hideo in his perfect garden is the part of you that tries to arrange everything just right before you allow yourself to relax. It wants the house to be in order, the inbox empty, the body healed, the relationship smooth. It believes that only when everything is clean inside and out you can let your shoulders drop. Then the storm comes and rearranges the branches. The paths are messy. The image is broken. And behind the frustration, a question appears. What if beauty includes this too? What if my heart also needs a little wildness, a little imperfection to feel truly alive? Kaito shows you how you cling to the idea of my life as something fixed, even while every part of it is changing. Job, roles, moods, even the cells of your body, all moving like a caravan. When you try to make any of it permanent, your hands grow tired. When you see that it is a moving pattern, not a solid block, something in you relaxes. You no longer shout at the river for flowing. You simply steer as kindly as you can. Osamu bending over his loom reveals how easy it is to believe that your work is small and disconnected, just one more task in a long, dull day. But when he sees the people, the rain, the soil, the sun, and the future warmth all woven into his cloth, his work fills with meaning. Perhaps you too have forgotten how many unseen hands and hearts are woven into your life.